Hi everyone and welcome back for today's video. As promised, this is the narrated version of the Julian painting, and as you might have seen in the sped up version, this one is going to be painted in oil paints. It has a pretty limited color palette, so this is only black, white, sienna, burnt sienna and burnt umber. And also when it comes to brushes, it is pretty limited as well. So I'm going to use a softer, larger brush for blending. And other than that, most of it is going to be painted with these angled brushes because I just love using them. They work pretty well for blocking in colors and also for making straight lines. So I really like working with those. Occasionally also with round brushes, but for this project here they came pretty handy. I'm also going to use a palette knife, as you can see also here in the first part of the video, where I'm going to apply some structure paste onto the panel. So this is a canvas board. And I'm doing this at the beginning stage to give me some texture onto the canvas. I want the background partly rough. So as it is on the reference photo itself, I wanted a little bit of a 3D effect. And this structure paste really gives me a good background, a rough and textured one, which really complements the entire painting. So get your palette knife, put some structure paste onto the panel and scratch over it, make some texture, layer it over each other, and then let it dry before you begin painting over it with acrylics or oil paints. This usually only takes a couple of hours. When these first steps were made, and of course I also traced the portrait itself onto the canvas itself, it was time to continue working on the background. I most of times do begin with the background just to put everything in place, give me a judgment about the lights and the darks, and also to have some paint on my canvas. Because at least for my taste, I really enjoy putting the first steps of paints onto the canvas in the beginning, so that you have some paint on the canvas, see some progress, and you get something on there, you know? If you would continue and focus on details first, perhaps painting out the facial structures and caring for details, this is so slow, and I'm getting bored with it pretty quickly. So I tend to do the bigger steps, the larger steps in the beginning, just to have something on my canvas to work with, and then on the next stages I'm going to focus more on detail and so on and so on. So for the background itself, we are going to use a thinned wash of burnt umber and burnt sienna, so the reddish and the brownish tones. They are thinned down with paint thinner and just brushing it over pretty loosely, so there is nothing really I'm going to pay attention at. So just putting the background where I think it belongs to. Also, having this paint thinned down pretty much helps getting into the craters that you have created with the structure paste. So if you would use really thick paint, you would have a hard time painting into those. Having the paint liquefied really works well with this. And when this is basically down, I just used a paper towel and dabbed it on there just to create some background effect, so that the colors are not really solid, so that the colors more or less intermix, get some textures and structures to give it a bit more of an interest than having only the brushed version of the background itself. When this was done, I let this dry. Of course, if you like to work a la prima, or at least putting some more paint down in the first steps, you can go ahead and just continue painting with the body itself. But I wanted this layer to be dry and having a clean start when I paint the portrait and body itself. I used the very same colors directly from the tube, so there was no paint thinner involved at this stage. Used my brushes, mixed some midtones between all of these colors and started blocking in the darks and the lights. At this stage I really did not focus so much on detail, I just wanted to have the darkest parts where they belong, contrasting towards the lighter parts and some midtones in between. I wanted to structure the muscles, I wanted to see where everything is, but when it comes to detail I more or less tend to paint into layers. So when this base layer is going to dry, I'm going to paint over it with another layer and then another layer until I have the softness and smoothness as I want it to be in the end. Another plus, especially when you're new to painting itself, you can correct shades and color tones on the go. I really did not bother if my lights are as light enough and my darks are as dark enough, and especially if the midtones are the correct value and the color tone. In this base layer I just want to see where everything is really roughly. I can go over it in the next layers and correct my color tones and even shift it toward another tone if it was a complete fail. This is something I really like using oil paints, that you can manipulate your colors for every layer. This is really easy and fun to make. If you want to alter your colors though, it is easier to have the layer dried first and then add another layer, a new fresh layer of paint over it, because otherwise you're going to intermix and interblend your colors and it's going to give you a hard time getting the value or the color tone that you're looking for. Something that you're going to realize when you're painting in oil paints is that your paints are going to dry a bit dull and matte when they are dry. So especially when it comes to the dark tones like the burnt umbers and the blacks, they look way lighter when they are dry, and this is something that can be a bit tricky when you're going to paint over it with the next layers, especially when you're not going to paint over the entire thing but only want to correct some parts of the body or the face itself. What helps there is if you use some linseed oil, just the tiniest bit on your brush, and go over there. This will bring your colors back to life and into their natural color range and look, so as they are going to look when they are red and freshly painted. It just gives you a better impression on where to change some values or not, because if you don't do this and you have a comparison again the dried and the wet version paint, it always is a bit tricky to judge if you did a good job on changing the colors or not. So if you have reddened your colors in the first place and paint over some areas there, it gives you a better judgment in the end how everything is going to look when each of the paints are dry again. But make sure to only use a very thin amount of the linseed oil, because otherwise you're going to oil up the painting too much and it will thin down your paint, it will take ages to dry, so just be careful there. As you could see over the entire painting process, I was blocking in my colors pretty roughly, so I shifted the colors around, made some changes to the color tones itself, to the values itself, but left it pretty roughly. Every now and then, I'm not sure if you can see it on the video itself, I'm using an older, larger brush, a pretty soft one, and I then go over there and blend my color tones together. This for me is a pretty simple method and saves me so much time. Of course, I could use smaller brushes and really take care for detail and paint much slower, but this blending works so much quicker for me, and as I paint in layers anyways, I can go over areas and correct them in the next layer if I need it. This of course only works for larger areas, so if you want to go for a detailed area and need to blend this, you can of course do this, but you will need to refine it afterwards because you're going to smudge the paints together. Especially when it comes to areas like the ear or the eyes or the mouth, you might want to use a different technique there, because otherwise you're going to smudge the colors around a bit too much. Also make sure when you are going to use this technique to blend your colors, get yourself some kind of kitchen paper or a cloth and clean your brush every now and then. Otherwise you're going to smudge the paint from perhaps a darker area towards a lighter area, and this really is something you do not want on your blending process. This is going to create mud and changes the colors where I do not want it to change. So usually I just do a couple of strokes, then clean my brush and then go for the next area, just to have everything as clean as possible. And depending on how much detail you want for your project, this is the technique you're going to follow for each step. If you want to have more details there, you just have to let your layers dry, go over there with the next layer and add more detail, let it dry again. You can do this as often as you want. In my very last steps, I'm going to focus on the mouth and the eyes and the hairs. So this is something I really do at the very last. So once I'm happy with the design, I like the look, all the proportions are correct, and I like the shading and lighting there. Everything is dried. The final step comes, which is varnishing the entire painting. Usually you should wait about half a year to varnish your painting with a final varnish, simply to allow your paints to completely dry so that nothing is going to crack over the years. I'm using the Gemvar varnish, which is a retouch one, so you can apply it once your paint is dry to the touch. It has the advantage that it protects your painting and it seals right away, even if your paint is not completely solid dry. So you can apply this varnish once your painting is dry to the touch, so about a couple of days after completing it. It will protect it and the paints can still breathe through this layer, which is pretty brilliant. I simply love the product, and on top of this it brings your colors back to life. So you can see here the dried version is pretty dull and has mutant colors. As soon as I put the varnish on there, everything comes back to life. The colors turn back into vibrancy, and I really like this effect. This really is a satisfying moment for me because I can see the entire painting, how it is supposed to look for the first time actually. I hope you enjoyed watching the longer version. Perhaps you have learned something new or got inspired to try a first or an oil painting yourself. If you have any questions about the techniques that I've used or want to see something more in detail or in more depth, just let me know in the comment section or contact me directly on Instagram or Facebook, wherever you like. Leave me a thumbs up if you liked the video, and of course subscribe to my channel if you have not done already. You can find a variety of different videos here, so it is from painting, drawing, acrylic pouring, resin artwork. There is something for everyone, I guess. So have a look at my playlists. This was enough self-advertising for this moment. So thank you for your time, thank you for watching, and other than that, I hope to see you in my next video. Have a great day. Bye bye.